Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I'm going to talk about 5 things that the Supreme Court can do to protect the Second Amendment. Okay, and the issue that we're running into is that the Supreme Court does not have any enforcement powers, so they're handing down decisions that are favorable for our gun rights. But states like New York, New Jersey, Maryland, California, Illinois, they're basically ignoring it. Okay, so what can the Supreme Court do, right? Because the way it normally works, Supreme Court gives an opinion, and then it's up to the lower courts to enforce that opinion. But what can they do if the lower courts are refusing to do their job? So I came up with a list of things over here. The first thing that the Supreme Court can do is they can get rid of the permitting requirements, and that's both for a permit to carry a gun or to purchase a gun or to purchase ammunition, because there's lots of states out there where you gotta get a permit to buy a gun, a permit to buy ammunition, a permit to carry a gun. So they need to basically declare that all of this permitting is unconstitutional. Okay. Now, the reason why the Supreme Court is in a position to do this is because they have already said in the Heller, McDonald, and the NYSERPA versus Bruin decision that the Second Amendment can only be interpreted in the text, history, and tradition of 1791 when the Second Amendment was ratified. Okay, so uh, basically what that means is that they got to go back to 1791, and you got to consider what the lawmakers meant at that time. And for example, back in 1791, there was people committing violent crimes with guns. Okay, but they did not put any restrictions in the Second Amendment. They could have, but they didn't. In fact, the Supreme Court has said that the gun control is basically specifically limited to whatever gun control existed in 1791. Okay, so back in 1791, you didn't need a permit to buy a gun, carry a gun, or buy ammunition. Okay, so that's something that the Supreme Court can easily get rid of. And the other important thing that needs to be tied into this is that you don't need a permit to travel into other states or to other cities. Okay, so that's an important thing that the Supreme Court can give us. Okay, number two, there's a law out there, right? I forget what the name of the law is, but basically, with regards to pistols specifically, let's say I want to buy a pistol in another state. Well, I can order it in that other state, or I can buy it in another state, but it has to be shipped back to my own state, to an FFL in my state, so that they can transfer it to me. So that's a law that needs to be struck down as unconstitutional, because that did not exist in 1791. And the significance of this is that if the states are forcing you to buy a gun only in that state, or to do the transfer only in that state, that's a way of controlling you. Okay, so they need to get rid of this control mechanism and allow the people, let's say in New York or New Jersey or in California, to go outside their states and buy guns. If and the reason for this is because, let's say California makes it illegal for guns to be sold at all within the state. Okay, so what are the people in California going to do? Well, they need that option to be able to travel outside of the state and buy those guns and buy that ammunition and buy the magazines. Okay, so that's something that the Supreme Court can do, because there was no such restriction back in 1791. Okay, number three, there has to be limits when doing background checks. There has to be limits on what would disqualify you. Okay. Now, first of all, let me say this: I am against background checks. Okay, background checks to me is first of all, it's unconstitutional. The background checks did not exist in 1791. Okay. However, I don't think that this current Supreme Court is going to go that far. Okay. So I'll take whatever I can get. For now, if they can just limit it so that only, let's say, a violent crime disqualifies somebody from being able to buy a gun, I'll accept that. Let's take what we can get, and then down the road, if we get a more constitutional court, we'll go back there and we'll get rid of the background checks altogether. But I don't think this Supreme Court now is going to go that far. So let's get what we can get out of it. Because here's the thing: there's lots of people, for example, in New York, that have been convicted of a felony just for possession, okay, just for owning a gun or owning a magazine of that has more than 10 rounds. So that should not be. If you've been convicted of a crime like that and you've been slapped with a felony, well, that certainly should not disqualify you from being able to travel outside your state and buy a gun. Again, this goes back to number two. That's the reason why you have to be able to travel outside your state and buy a gun, because you can't let these anti-gun states control the people within that state of if they can buy a gun or not buy a gun. So people need to be able to travel outside of their state to buy a gun. So there's a law that was passed specifically as far as pistols that says that you can't basically you can't buy a gun outside your state, or if you do, it has to be transferred back into your state. So to an FFL to transfer to you, that's got to go. Okay, so that's something that the Supreme Court can easily do because that didn't exist in 1791. Okay, the other thing that we need is number 4 over here, is relief for people that have been falsely arrested and falsely convicted. And again, this goes back to the example that I gave of, if let's say you got caught in New Jersey, let's say, with a gun, and they convicted you for that. In fact, I met a guy that basically was convicted and did 6 months in jail for a BB gun. Okay, so he had a house out here in PA. Basically, his kids were shooting in the backyard or something. The kids put the gun in the back seat of his car, and he was basically driving back home. He didn't even know the BB gun was back there. He got pulled over for something, and the cops saw the BB gun and decided to make a big deal out of it. And he ended up doing 6 months in jail for a BB gun. Okay, so that's an example of false arrests and false convictions. The Supreme Court should basically give relief, basically all. A full expungement, basically. Full pardon, full expungement, as if though that conviction never had happened. Okay, and number 5. Okay, the states should have to pay the legal fees, for people that let's say their rights are infringed upon, and then they have to go to the courts to get those, to basically get their rights back. Well, the state should have to pay a legal fee, the legal fees, right? But they should also have to pay a fine on top of that, right? Because they violated somebody's civil rights. So the states like New York, New Jersey, Maryland, California, Hawaii, but not just any state that violates people's Second Amendment rights, and it shouldn't even just be limited to Second Amendment. That's all the rights. But any state that violates people's Second Amendment rights, they should have to pay the legal fees, and they should also have to pay a penalty on top of that. They should be penalized for violating people's civil rights. Okay, so this is something that the Supreme Court has in their power to do, to deal with these states that are refusing to comply with the Second Amendment opinions that the Supreme Court has handed down. Okay, again, the issue here is that the Supreme Court does not have any enforcement powers. They depend on the lower courts in those states to enforce their opinions. However, if those lower courts are refusing to enforce their opinions, the people need a way around that. Okay, so this is the way around that that the Supreme Court can provide. That's going to basically pull the legs out from the state. Okay, so number 1, get rid of the permitting requirements, and also people shouldn't need permits to travel across state lines or into cities. Okay, get rid of the permitting requirements. Number 2, they should strike down the law that says that that basically limits what states you can buy your guns in. Right, that limits it. Any law that says that you're limited as to what state you can buy a gun in, that they should strike down. Number 3, the backgrounds. Okay, they have to make it so that people are not being denied the ability to buy a gun because at some point they were convicted of having a magazine over a certain round count. Okay, clearly that's an unconstitutional law. So again, number 4, relief for false arrests, false convictions. It's kind of tied into number 3 over there. And number 5, they should have to pay the state should have to pay the legal fees and the fines, for infringing on people's rights. So let me know what you guys think. If you guys have any other ideas, put them in the comments. I'll talk to you all soon.